If you ever find yourself trapped in Half-Life Blue Shift's elevator, you'll find that this entire layout is designed intentionally so that you can see everything going on outside the window and see the scientist's reaction all in the same shot. But if you go to the same spot in Blue Shift's remake, you'll be by this window instead, which means rather than being able to see everything in one shot, you have to turn to look at everything. These are two very different approaches to immersion. Both are scripted events with really no player input, but one is about having the player immersed in the scene in its entirety, kind of like watching a stage play, and the other has players being an active participant in the scene, having them choose where to look. But which one of these games is more immersive? That is what I'm trying to find out today. And to do that, I've identified 5 different ways that these games approach immersion. And which one of these games does a better job of making the player feel like these virtual dioramas are actually alive? I want to start with atmosphere because I think it's one of the most important aspects of immersion that often gets overlooked. Atmosphere in video games comes from how well a scene can convey its mood or tone through its set design. And in the case of Blue Shift, it's really about making the player feel what it's like to experience the resonant cascade from the perspective of a security guard. Blue Shift, like every Half-Life game, starts players with a walking segment that introduces them to the world. In the original game, the player walks through mundane tasks like walking to a locker room, changing into uniform, and clocking into work. In the remake, this happens as well, but there's a little bit of extra flair that happens with each interaction. Just look at this scene from the remake for a moment.
How's it going? Here you go, Calhoun. Hey, I know you're not scheduled for a couple more days, but if you want to squeeze in a few shots in the range, there's plenty of room.
I just think the scene was so much more immersive to me, because at this moment, I was Barney Calhoun. But isn't that kind of strange? The original, despite being, dated visually, seems more realistic in some ways. There's no music, no extra sound effects, just walking into work and figuring out what to do. But the remake added music, sound effects, and extra flair, which makes it less realistic, but it just felt more real to me, and thus, I was more immersed in the game. But more often than not, I think immersion comes from moments like this. And that's why atmosphere is so important, because we get locked into these games because of intentional creative decisions that developers make. But let's keep going, because I want to see how atmosphere is really handled in both of these games. Atmosphere can also come from something kind of feeling real, which is kind of where immersion gets tricky, because something that's realistic and something that feels real isn't always the same thing. And in the case of Blue Shift, realism is far less about simulating what actually happens in real life, but more so emulating what the average person thinks the real life equivalent of that activity is, if that makes sense. So that's why I want to talk about this section, because in the original Blue Shift, this section feels like a video game. No, my video game feels like a video game, no! Obviously in universe, you would want someone to stand by this button and activate it. But this whole layout to me just doesn't feel believable. Which again, is perfectly fine for Blue Shift, but it doesn't feel as immersive to me. It took me out of the moment seeing a segment like this. In the remake, it feels more realistic because this button has been replaced with an entire control room. There's even a basic puzzle players need to solve to redirect the shipping container where they need to go. Speaking of that, I really like how it's a broken shipping container because being shoved into this tiny shipping container feels more precarious than it did in the original. The sewers are kind of an interesting segment in this game because, I don't know, playing through them I feel almost like cozy. Maybe it's because in real life I myself am not wet and covered in piss, but I found myself immersed in both versions of the sewers. However, I think the remake does improve upon the original because it adds a lot more detail to the water. However, there's a problem, is that when you're in the water in the remake, ladders tend to not work, which every time it happened, it just kind of took me out of the moment. A lot of the things I'm describing in this video are really just my subjective opinion. And I think that's the challenge of talking about immersion in video games. What is immersive to one person can completely take someone else out of the game. But broadly speaking, I think a game is more immersive when it makes the player feel something. And a lot of the emotions for both versions of Blue Shift come from the player feeling the horror of the resonant cascade. In the original Blue Shift, that feeling of horror comes from seeing bodies sprawled all over the floor. A lot of that emotion feels subtle in the original though. The only section where I felt a lot of tension was crawling through the dark vents with headcrabs jumping out, and that's also a section that basically is repeated from the original Half-Life. The remake adds a lot more details to make that horror feel more immersive. Like seeing a group of headcrab zombies eating a guard and sneaking up to them. The facility also feels like it's constantly having a meltdown. I actually felt on edge walking through this hallway seeing the dust and debris fall from the shaking building. The echo of car alarms and vortigaunts also kept me alert because I could tell they were close, but I could never really pinpoint exactly where they are because of the reverb. So overall, in terms of atmosphere, I kind of feel like the remake was a little bit more immersive for me. I think it really shows how additional music, sound design, and intentional details can go a long way in making a game feel immersive. But there's still a lot to talk about, and I think these next couple points are where both games do a great job of making the player feel immersed. Blue Shift's game design seems to be a lot more focused around having the player interact with the environment to be able to progress. You have to actually lower and raise cranes to reach the top level. You need to redirect this train to rescue Dr. Rosenberg. You can shoot out these wooden stoppers, which actually cause these to roll down. And in the original game, you have to shut down this power box, which will then cause the lights to go out to be able to progress. Interactions like that make the world feel alive, but also make the gameplay more interesting. The remake has these puzzle sections as well, and even though some of them are presented a bit differently, the overall concept remains. The world responds to your actions. And I think that's one of the most important things a video game can do: say yes to the player. But it's kind of why I think moments like this is actually where the remake kind of falters a bit. You see, in this puzzle, you're supposed to guide the train across this turntable, and you control the turntable with this control room. So you may think, oh, well, I have a rocket launcher at this point, so surely I could just blow the glass up. Nope, that doesn't work. The actual solution to this puzzle is you need to blow up this vent on top of the building, jump down, and move the chair in front of the door. Except the door opens outwards, so the chair blocking it wouldn't make any sense anyway. It's one of those smaller things where the game said no and the intended solution just felt worse, so it kind of took me out of the game for a moment. And it's the small details that I think really matter. And while this section didn't really do it for me, there are a lot of great details of both of these games. And I'm talking about like small stuff, like the sink turning on when you interact with it. You can also check the security cameras to see what's going on in the facility. And in the remake, car alarms go off if an explosion happens nearby. You can also shut this lady's laptop and she gets mad at you.
Are you mad?
And ultimately, these are just basic interactions. And I think both the remake and the original do a really good job of having interactions in their world that make the player feel immersed. That's all I really had about how the world interacts with the player. And now I want to talk about how the NPCs communicate story to the player and how that affects how we can get immersed into this game.
See, that's lag. Get it? Because it's lagging like the source engine. Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny? I've done this in 3 videos in a row. Isn't it really cool? I keep doing this over and over and over again. Like and subscribe if you want me to keep doing this.
The story in the original Blue Shift is mostly told through sparse NPC conversations. Although in the original, there's a lot of story that's packed into the original segment. When you're on the tram, you'll see guards playing on the arcade machine, people grabbing lunch, and just NPCs that just have a basic routine. NPCs are constantly moving, which makes the world feel less static. But the thing is that once you're past this opening segment, there's a lot less cool details with the NPCs. Most of the NPCs you find are either just standing around, crouched over, or just don't want to fall past their predetermined area that they're in. But in the remake, there's a ton of extra NPCs that add a lot of narrative flair to the game.
I don't care if someone locks themselves out of their office. I don't care if someone needs something fixed. When 10 a.m. comes around, Black Mesa's seen the last of Jesse Reinfeld Copeland III.
In the remake's version of Duty Calls, there's actually another guard that you find that'll walk with you in a couple of areas.
You don't have a flashlight on you, do you?
He'll comment on a lot of the surroundings, but I think it's really cool how him and the scientists actually react. Then later on, when you reach this elevator, he stays back to push the button before you're separated. And later on, when you meet back with them, you get a better feel for him as character. A lot of the narrative in this game isn't just about go here, do that. It tells you about who they are as people, which is really what makes them feel realistic.
I got a thing about heights.
Now, in both versions of the game, you rescue Dr. Rosenberg, who is essential for escaping the facility. In the original, he feels a bit stiff. I ended up just kind of running far ahead of him, which meant that I reached the area and then needed to backtrack to find him again. And then he kept getting kind of stuck on the stairs and didn't really want to progress. It just felt like I was guiding a robot rather than working together with a real person.
I need to rest a bit before I could go on.
But in the remake, you're not just with Dr. Rosenberg, you're with a whole group of people, and they walk with you throughout this entire segment. While the dialogue humanized some of the characters, some of it just felt kind of like cheesy or something you'd kind of see in a Marvel movie. Like, they seem like they're a little bit too nonchalant about the situation they're in. Not that every piece of dialogue needs to be serious, but I think there's a balance that the remake just didn't quite strike. So by now, I think the trend should be clear. Immersion is far more about enhancing the mood of the scene rather than trying to emulate reality. None of these are real people, but the remakes just seem a little more real to me. And I think this is a perfect time to now bring up art style. Now the thing about art style is that I do think that realistic graphics are still an art style. But both of these aren't trying to directly be photorealistic. The original Blue Shift uses basically the same tech and art style that the original Half-Life had. And I think a lot of the art style came from the textures that Valve artist Karen Lauer drew for this game. You can tell that you can break this lock without the need for glowing outlines or pop-ups. Although, without that, there are, I'm sure, some players that didn't realize that they could do that. And so when adding details to a game, I think that's where it becomes a bit of a challenge. And you can see where in the remake, they just kind of had to make concessions and just draw, like, put the object you need to place here. But I do think the remake does a lot of artistic things correctly, but it does one thing that I didn't really like about it. But before I get into what it did wrong, I want to talk about what it did right first. The labs look clean and polished, the sewers look grimy and kind of dingy, and Zen managed to look a lot more otherworldly, at least to me, than the original. And a lot of that comes down to the way I think the games handle lighting. The Source engine can handle a lot more dynamic shadows. So you end up with scenes like this where you can see the dramatic vent shadow in this hallway. I mean, you've probably been seeing it through this entire video. The lighting in this game, I think, looks really, really good. But what's even better about it is it's far more than just looking nice. It serves the gameplay too. These red lights in the vent help guide players where to go. And it's great in this puzzle where you need to detonate an explosive to open this door. But when you first come here, there's no explosion planted. So if you try to activate it, nothing happens. However, you can find a convenient pile of explosives nearby, which is telegraphed by this light. And when you do blow it up, the explosion feels realistic because there's a lot of debris and particle effects that happen that made it feel immersive to me. But now it's time to talk about where I think this game gets the art style wrong. And in my opinion, what I think it gets wrong is these outdoor segments, at least a little bit. Not to say that the original was, great in terms of outdoor environments. I mean, it's really a lot of low poly rocks with a JPEG of a mountain behind it. But I think it works better for that game because, the rest of the game is low poly. It doesn't feel like it's out of place. The remakes, some of these outdoor sections just feel a little bit out of place because I think the art style of the Blue Shift remake relies so heavily on its lighting. And suddenly when you just have the flat lighting of the sun, it just shows the datedness of the textures. And I think specifically the texture of the rock just looks like it's something out of like The Sims rather than Half-Life in my opinion. Now, critiques like this are just subjective, but it's something to keep in mind when designing a game because people will have subjective responses to art style. Like, let's take Zen for an example. I found myself preferring the way it looks in the remake, but I know there's plenty of people who prefer the way it looks in the original. But there's also another aspect to these games that I find really interesting. This is not a problem specifically with Half-Life, but generally something that happens with any linear gaming experience, especially if the game is older. If you stop shooting everyone, stop solving the puzzles, stop engaging with the game the way you're supposed to, and just take in the environment, the game stops feeling real and feels like a video game again. There's an eerie silence to a lot of the environments. The remake did add ambient sounds and screen shakes, but it's still kind of the same. Nothing is really moving. All of these scenes feel like something you could see in real life, but it's all just too still. But even though in this moment I'm not immersed in the way the developers might have intended, I can still appreciate it in the way that I would when I look at a painting. It's obvious that a human put these polygons together to trick our monkey brains into seeing this as a place that could exist in real life. And it's moments like these that remind us that no matter how hard we try, there will always be a limit to how much we can make something feel immersive or realistic. And I love that even though we'll never reach perfection, we'll still keep trying to get a little bit closer to it. And I think that's the beauty of creating art. The process of making it is just as important as the final result we see. But I do want to talk about creative process because I think that leads into the next point that I want to talk about, intrigue, and why games intrigue us to keep exploring. See, none of these small details that I talk about in this video would matter if players didn't feel an intrigue for this world. And I think Half-Life draws players in because of its perfect mesh between the mundane and the fantastical. Whether it's the routine of being a scientist at Black Mesa and then the incoming alien invasion, or the familiar Eastern European architecture clashing with the Combine's oppressive structures. And that is what makes these environments feel real. They're rooted in mundane, real things that we can imagine ourselves experiencing. And Blue Shift has the luxury to be able to rely on a lot of the work that Valve did with the original Half-Life. But the meaningful tweaks to that format allow players to get re-immersed into this world. I think being able to experience some of the events of the first game but from a different perspective intrigued me a lot more than I was expecting. What's cool about being immersed is that it also literally changed the way I played the game. In the remake, I was so on edge all the time that when these two security guards entered this door, I almost threw a grenade at them when they entered. I had to pre-aim it at the last second. And the fact that my playstyle literally changed means that I was an active participant in this world. And I really think that's just a testament to how good the world design of these games are. But the final question remains, which one is actually more immersive? Blue Shift or its remake? It's really hard to argue that the original Blue Shift kind of has its own charm. The areas are well designed, and the amount of things that actually respond to the players are really impressive, especially for a game of its time. But to me, I just found the remake to be so much more immersive. Everything from the sound design, to the music, to the superior lighting and graphical fidelity. It just really drew me into the world of Half-Life. And I was immersed nearly the entire time I played through the game. But how we respond to each game is subjective. The original Blue Shift is still an amazing game, and I think it's immersive as well. And at the end of the day, immersion is just one of the ways that a game can be great anyway.
Video complete.